For over 35 years, Todd Garner has overseen blockbuster films like Con Air, Anger Management, Triple X, 13 Going on 30, and the Mortal Kombat franchise.
Why are they letting you make these movies?
Join Todd as he shares tips and stories from the front lines of producing in Hollywood.
I'm Adam Sandler.
I'm Rebel Wilson.
This is Jeff Probst.
I'm Kaylee Cuoco.
I'm Eli Roth.
This is Marlon Wayans.
Hey, it's Ed Helms.
This is Shay Mitchell.
Hey everybody, this is Kevin James, and this is The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide.
The Producer's Guide with Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
Todd Garner.
What a combination.
Welcome back to The Producer's Guide, where we deep dive into the journeys of the most innovative minds in film and television. Today, I'm going to shine a spotlight on a remarkably talented guy who just embodies the spirit of everything that I love about this business, his positivity, the way that he looks at movies, and the way that he thinks about his craft and the way that he dreams big. And that's Stephen Love Jr. Stephen grew up in a small town of Filbert in Bennettsville, South Carolina, and his journey began with his grandfather's produce stand, where he fostered the entrepreneurial spirit that would shape his future. By sixth grade, Stephen was already making waves with his event videography business, creating movies for people. He'll explain in the podcast where he would create wedding videos, but actually made them into small movies and kind of created stories based on the wedding videos. And in high school, he discovered his true passion was his narrative film and television producing. Stephen went on to Morehouse College, where he majored in business, and he founded the Morehouse Filmmakers Association, bringing in none other than the great Spike Lee as an honorary advisor. And this initiative paved the way for now at Morehouse's thriving cinema, television, and emerging media studies program. Stephen's journey, to me, is a testament of the hands-on experience he's worked on award-nominated projects like the PBS documentary Jail No Bail, short films such as Saved, and he created a really incredible production company called Made with Love, and his most recent movie is a movie called That's Her. I think he embodies everything that producing is. I think he's an incredible human. He has a great heart and kind of embodies everything that I think and hope the movie business can actually be. Enjoy. All right, I am here with Stephen Dr. Love. How you doing, sir?
Doing well, man. Good to see you.
Excellent, man. Excellent, man. And in researching this podcast today, I came across a great quote: "A country boy with big city dreams." Can you just briefly explain where this quote came from and what it means to you?
I mean, one is actually me, and two, it was actually funny enough. A take on a J. Cole quote in one of his lyrics, and I just kind of took it from him.
You grew up in South Carolina. Walk me through kind of the inception of the idea that you could be a filmmaker.
Yeah, I mean, a big part of it came from growing up on that farm as an only child, no brothers and sisters, plenty of cousins to make up for that on the weekends, but for the most part, it was me and, no pun intended, a fields of dreams, I guess. But growing up in small towns like that in South Carolina is what gave me the imagination. And then we moved to a place that had a little after school program that taught kids how to use handy cams and upload to iMovie. And I fell in love with that and asked the teacher, what is this role called where you get to pick the best person to shoot and the best person to cut and the best person to be on camera and put them together and make sure that it happens and be responsible for that. Like, what is that called? And she said, I was a team leader. Like, no, in the real world, she's like, it's called producing. And so I was like maybe 12 at that point, and just from that day on, knew I wanted to be a producer.
Was there a particular movie that you may have seen early on as a child or maybe a little bit later that really, really affected you and made you think, man, I'd like to do this?
Yeah, there was a movie called Pay It Forward in 2000 that was really about a little kid that was a little less fortunate and had an idea, and his idea changed the world. And as a creative kid, that really deeply impacted me, honestly. I grew up selling peaches on the weekends, and so and selling peaches and selling movies is not that different, really.
That's true.
But seeing that movie inspired me that I could. My dad's a pastor too, and so I think that movie, albeit had nothing to do with religion at all, but that movie was one that deeply affected me in a spiritual way, and I think and gave me the the inspiration that you could change the world with an idea, with a creative idea, or tell a story that deeply impacted people and changed lives. So that was the spark.
And being a pastor's kid, stories must always have been important to you. And hearing your father tell stories and how he laid out those stories. As a storyteller, when did you, in high school, sort of realize this was the path, going to Morehouse, really studying it? Did you do any theater, or did you go right into making movies, or did you do any preaching yourself? What was your outlet for storytelling?
So I didn't do any preaching, but ironically, after I learned how to shoot and edit, because I'd been an entrepreneur since I was 4 or 5 years old, I wanted to know how to make money doing it. So the first thing I ever filmed was, after that program, the first thing I ever filmed on my own was actually my dad's church services, because I wanted to, I had a little handy cam that I saved up money to get, and asked for some gifts for Christmas and whatnot. And, but I started filming his services and selling the tapes to make money.
Amazing.
And so, now, of course, when he found out, he kind of shut that down, and I became the free. I became the free video ministry for the church, right? But
he's like, "Well, you like doing it. Let's keep it going."
That's right, for free. That was my punishment. But I did that throughout high school. But yeah, that gave me the right principles, though, and led me to Morehouse. They did not have a film program at the time, but so I studied business, finance and marketing, and started a film program while I was there, actually. So Spike Lee helped us get a major going over there.
Those early movies that you were making, you said you started on an iPhone, then you switched over to a handy cam. Besides filming your father's church services, were you making movies? Were you gathering your friends? What was that like?
Absolutely. I was coercing all of my friends to make short films. We would film. Sometimes we would just film local events and turn it into like short films. People would get their wedding tape and expect that they would have a full tape of their wedding, and it would just be some really cool. I thought something that was really cool and chopped up and didn't have the entire service. Some people liked it, some people didn't, but it is what it is. But yeah, I was making short films all the time, and then same in college. I always supplemented my class work with practical experience, either making films or interning at places, that kind of thing.
Do you remember the first audience feedback you got, and what was it, and how did that feel?
The first audience feedback I got probably wasn't real, because it was family. Oh, that's so good, and that was terrible. But
by the way, it's why we filmmakers still have friends and family screenings first. We just get that out of the way.
That's right. You got to soften the blow, depending on the family. The family could be also harsher, but the first real audience feedback I got was after high school, while I was in college, learning more about film in a proper way. I would bring that knowledge back to my small town and help with that same little after school program that helped me learn. We had a summer version of it where we would teach younger kids how to do, film. And in those situations, I was producing these short films, and the kids were all writing and directing and whatnot. And the first time I had real audience feedback from that standpoint was at like our premiere for those kids, and so. Yes, it was all their families, but then it was also people from the school district and other programs that were seeing this work, and they're like, "This is not normal for these kids of this age to be doing this kind of work." And I felt very proud as sort of the producer in this space. I felt very proud of how it all came out.
And so, when you're at Morehouse, when you said you were learning film in a proper way, what did that look like? Since they didn't have a film program, walk me through kind of how you were making that happen, and also the connection to Spike and how you came up with the idea to reach out to him.
Yeah, so Spike Lee is an alumni of Morehouse, obviously. And Spike, Seeth Mann is a director. Bill Nunn, rest in peace, a great actor. Samuel L. Jackson, all these luminaries in the space. And there wasn't a film program. So I reached out to all the alum who were in the industry, but somehow found their way there without studying it at Morehouse, and just asked for help, And so, Seeth Mann helped us with the $600 that we really, really needed in order to start the student club organization to get started as a film crew. And Spike Lee gave us literally a suitcase trunk full of DVDs that were all the movies that he says he requires his students at NYU in the master's program to watch before they step foot in his class. and it was amazing. So we had this like Spike Lee DVD library, and I would just, I just bootstrap my film nerd education basically, while I was in undergrad to learn it while helping to build the program at the same time. And I'm a learner by doer, about being a doer. So I really just try to make as many movies as possible. And the first real short film I made that had a proper process and story and all the things was a film called Saved. And it was black and white because we couldn't afford a colorist. It was a silent film because we couldn't afford sound equipment. And it was the first film it launched a bunch of careers though, actually. So it was my first short film. Stefan Bristol, who directed See You Yesterday, it was his first short film as well. And Hope Harris, who's a working actor now. And that film took us all to Cannes Film Festival in my sophomore year, I think it was. And it helped him get into NYU and helped me get into USC. And it was an amazing experience, but it was like our first real, short film.
And do you remember any of those movies, those Spike DVDs? Can you rattle off a few of those for the people listening?
Half of them were his movies.
Hey, by the way, you could do a hell of a lot worse than watch just Spike Lee movies.
The one that was the most impactful was Godfather. Godfather 1, 2, and 3, the entire trilogy, as well as the first film for Spielberg, the first film for Zemeckis, Spike's first film, She's Gotta Have It. Like, he really wanted us to see the beginnings of these people who we now respect and love their work. He wanted us to see how they started, because that was that had more kinship to where we are, Then there would be some like international films thrown in there, like La Haine, was in there. And City of God, like, films that really were, I think, impactful for him. And of course, some of his classics as well, which most of which we were just already watching and loving, et cetera. Like Do the Right Thing, School Days, certainly, et cetera.
Those books for those movies that you just talked about that Spike wrote were so impactful for me in my education in terms of just really digging into how he got those movies made, what his mindset was, the scripts, that he just so generous to share that with the world, like his process on those early movies. In the same way that Robert Rodriguez is so generous in the way he walked through the making of El Mariachi. Those texts are so invaluable. Speaking of just bootstrapping a film education, and another thing you said that really resonated with me is when I was really early on in my career at the Walt Disney Company, I was a creative executive, not making any money, so couldn't really go on a Christmas vacation. I didn't really have the resources to do that. But what I did have was I could expense all the DVD and VHS rentals, and this was back when it was VHS. And I would go to Vidiot's and I would go through every filmmaker from start to finish. So I would do Frank Capra all the way through first and watch them in order, and watch Howard Hawks movies in order, watch all the Scorsese's movies and the Peckinpah movies, and all in order. Because when you watch the filmmakers in order, you can see the learning, you can see the drawing on the past and the choices that they made. And especially with Howard Hawks, like the way he switched genres and why he switched genres, you can kind of see an arc. Very, very amazing. And I would just sit there for 2 weeks and watch movies, and watching them in order really gave me a really special understanding of the filmmaking process.
I mean, even with Scorsese specifically, you see his learnings as you watch his filmography, but you also see how much more daring he becomes. Yeah. Right? Like, he's always trying new stuff. Like, even now, 30, 40 years later, he's still trying like new, fresh things that you would think a filmmaker fresh out of school would try, It's very impressive, I think, just to see that he's so curious that way.
All the things you're talking about in terms of your education at Morehouse and bootstrapping that and watching those DVDs and making films, a lot of people think producing is counting money or investing money or raising money, or people don't really know what the hell we do. What you're describing in your filmmaking education is really an education of a filmmaker. So when you first had the idea of team leader, which she defined as producer, What was your idea of what a producer did? And as you educated yourself as a filmmaker and bootstrapped this education, what was your misconception then? And what is your definition now of what you do as a producer?
My gut reaction as a conception when she told me that this was called producer is what I have full circle come to learn it actually is.
Huh?
Right. So in the moment, my gut reaction was, what is it called when you're in this role and you get to pick the best teammates, put them together, make sure that the story is kept throughout the journey, and then you deliver it on time? What is that? What is that called? Right. And that was her answer, was team leader, therefore producer. And over the years, that's taken a bunch of different, different avenues, right? Both personally and in the industry, the definition of producing has kind of changed and come back to its roots and gone away again. You're a producer because you raise money, or you're a producer because you found the IP and you developed it initially, but you didn't attach anybody. You're a producer because you did attach everybody. You're a producer because you are just a big name and we want your marketing capabilities. When I left Morehouse, I went to the START program, the Peter Start Producing Program at USC. And at that time, it was led by Larry Terman. And I only got into that program. I had no business getting into that program, by the way. The only reason I got in was because I hustled my way into Larry Terman's inbox. And then I hustled my way into a conversation with him one-on-one in person in LA. Even though I had no money to fly to LA, I got out there, sat down with him, and he was like, you produced your way into this room.
I was just going to say that. I was just going to say all of the moves you've made since you said that you lived in the deep forest of South Carolina, every move you made to get to Larry Terman's office is what producing is.
That's right. And he literally said that. He's like, you know what? I'm looking at your resume. There's nothing on your resume that says that you should be in this next class. Your grades are good and all of that. You study business, but the hustle, I cannot teach. And so you produce your way in this room. And so I think you deserve to be in the program. That's the only reason I got in. But under his tutelage, he's old school, right? He produced The Graduate. He produced American History X. He produced The Thing, the original one. He produced my mama's favorite movie as well, Kingdom Come. Like all these movies that just didn't necessarily, unless you get to know him, feel like they all go together. And then you realize he too is a filmmaker, right? He very much so had a deep understanding of film history. And I think that's necessary for a producer. I can't talk to or identify the best screenwriter or the best director or the best cinematographer or the best, even the best investor, really, unless I have a deep understanding of how the overall picture works. And that includes the creative. So that for me has been, that's been my understanding now. Is what I've come back to, is like, it really is the same that I learned at, 10 and 12 years old, which is you have the idea or you find the idea and you put the right people around it that are smarter than you in their respective fields, and you usher that in. And as one of my mentors calls it, you're the vision keeper.
First of all, what is your taste in movies, and where did that taste start to take root, and how has it matured? You started to teach yourself, then you get into this Peter Stark program. I'm sure you're being at USC and being with a lot of other people and your peers and seeing Larry's movies. How did your taste evolve as you got a little bit older?
This is not cliche, I promise, but the truth is my taste came from the limitations that I had as a kid. I had 5 VHS tapes in the cabinet at home before we got cable TV and all that. We couldn't afford cable TV, and it was too far in the woods for anybody to run the cable out there anyway. So all I had was a VHS tape and whatever came over the antenna. So outside of what was on TV, I had 5 VHS tapes. 3 of them were the Michael Bay Ninja Turtles franchise. One of them was Cool Runnings.
You're welcome for that one. I worked on that one at Disney.
Yep. Thank you, sir. And then the 5th one was 6. The 5th one was Lion King, and the 6th movie was not a movie; it was a VHS tape, which is why I forgot. It was a series called Amos and Andy, which Amos and Andy, I learned later as I got older, was actually kind of problematic because it started as a a radio show that was actually like a minstrel show, et cetera. And then it turned into a radio show, and it was guys cosplaying as black people. And then they made a show. By the time they made the show, it was no longer socially acceptable to cosplay as black people in blackface. So they had to cast black actors, and they were still caricatures or whatever. But I didn't understand any of that context at the time. I just thought it was funny because these are people that felt like my uncles and felt like people I grew up with in the country, I'm like, my uncle talks like that, whatever.
Comedy can do that. Comedy can just take you away and try to push down all the other stuff if it's well done and comedic.
That's right. But, what's interesting about that is to talk about how my taste evolved. My taste is both broad in the way that all of those films were, right? But it's conscious in the way that my understanding of what Amos and Andy actually represented as I learned further, right? It's conscious in that way. But then it's also, artful in the way that I learned through my time at Morehouse studying all those films with Spike, right? And it's conscious in the way that all those art films that I was exposed to, frankly, when I got to USC and meeting all these kids who were real film nerds. I thought I would love film. These kids could rattle off things from the 1930, 40, 50. I'm like, I don't know any of this stuff. I need to go back to work, And so it really, my taste now is, and I think my filmography represents that too, from like art house films to films that are independent films, but feel very commercial, and those directors go on to be big commercial directors, or big commercial movies that somehow get made in a commercial system, but have a real underpinning of this heart and this message, like a Pay It Forward did, right? Or the consciousness of a Spike Lee movie, or a consciousness of what I learned that Amos and Andy actually represented. And so, that's kind of how my taste has evolved. But in a lot of ways, it's still branches of the same tree of those 6 VHS tapes.
It's very interesting, and just the spirit of the uplifting nature of your movies and where that foundation was laid. I can remember, I'm much older than you by virtue of the fact that I worked on Cool Runnings. But while I was at Disney, because that we made Cool Runnings at Touchstone when I was at Disney. But while I was at Disney, we were invited in to do an early screening of The Lion King, and we sat in the Buena Vista Theater, and that came on, and that first 5 minutes levitated me, man. I mean, I was just like, I got to do better. This feeling I have right now. That first 5 minutes of that movie was so overwhelming, and I know everybody feels that way when they first saw it. But to like not have any even warning or context, just like, hey, come on, guys, we're gonna watch this new animated movie that Disney's gonna put out in 6 months, was mind blowing. And I think I've probably been chasing that feeling ever since, because once you feel it, you want to make other people feel that feeling, So now you graduate from Morehouse, you created the Morehouse Film Program. It's interesting because you and I have a very similar thing in that regard. If I went to Occidental College, it had a film program, but since it's a liberal arts college, it really didn't have like a proper deep film program. And in fact, when I graduated, I was supposed to be a theater major. They didn't even have a film major. So my degree is actually in art. So on paper, I'm an economics and an art major, which makes me feel very fancy. But I had to do.
That sounds like a producer.
Exactly. I had to do 9 independent studies to supplement my education at Occidental College in terms of the film program. And I worked early days as an editor for an industrial video production company, and was editing and doing production through this in the age of when industrials were a huge thing. Every training video, people were really spending real money to do it. And then I got my education, my practical education through that training. So I'm with you that being a doer is the best way to learn. Looking at now, AI scares the shit out of everybody, but you said like, hey, I had an iPhone and I could start. And so even with the technology increasing, iPhone 17 is going to have professional cameras on it. Even a young Stephen Love up in the woods of South Carolina, if you can get a phone, you can pretty much do almost everything you need to do to become a filmmaker. You can use your phone to download movies. You can make movies on your phone. Obviously, with AI, there are going to be kids that are going to be doing animation, and I mean animation, not like both in traditional animation, but also animating movies, putting themselves in things with special effects. Technology is increasing at such a rate that there really is no limitation for even someone who doesn't have cable to kind of figure it out. You are such an entrepreneur. You definitely fly in the face of anyone who thinks that producing is just a 1% job and you have to come from money to do it. The media does have a tendency to say, hey man, you can't make it in the movie business unless you you come from wealth, because you can't make any money and it's impossible to break through the glass ceiling and it's impossible to figure this out, and producing is not a real job and the business is dead, and et cetera, et cetera. You fly in the face of all of that, man. You came from a place that didn't have cable, far away, and you figured it out. And you produced your way into the Peter Stark program, and you've produced your way into a really, really robust career. What would you say to a young Stephen Love at 11 years old now, given all the technology and everything? In the way that Spike gave you a trunk full of DVDs, what's your advice for somebody who might be listening to this, who's like, 17, listening on their phone, but doesn't have any connections to the business or doesn't feel like they have any resources?
If I was 12 today, it'd be a wrap. I mean, it just feels like the only advice that I honestly give anybody is you have everything you need. I think it's really easy to focus on what you don't have, and there may be a long list of things you don't have. But even if the list of things you do have is short, you still have everything you need. Not just because of technology, but just that's a mindset thing, right? Like, I never felt like I didn't have, even if I didn't, because my mindset was, okay, well, what do I have? Right? Like, let's work with that, right? It's not that different from the way the Duplass brothers started, right? If they had if they had access to a friend that had a gas station and a friend that had an apartment and a friend that had a church, guess what their movie's going to be about? Those three locations. And they're just going to write the heck out of a story that is character driven and focuses on those three locations. And so my advice really, to somebody who has access to all of those tools you just mentioned, like, when I first started as a kid, there were no iPhones. So it was handy cams. It was literally like high 8 videotape, straight to plug in the FireWire into your computer and upload the iMovie and cut it, or Windows Movie Maker and cut it, or even before that, VHS tapes, like stop, hit record, start, hit record, back and forth. And so, but I didn't feel what I didn't have because I didn't have it, and I didn't know what it was because I didn't have cable to see what other people had. So for me, it was just, my mindset then would be the same as it is now, which is, what do you have? Like, work with that. And beyond all of the fancy tools and tricks, even if you do have access to nice phones and nice computers and cameras and all the things, none of that stuff matters. And I tell my students this all the time. None of that stuff matters if you don't know how to tell a story.
Mm-hmm.
You got to start with story. The way that I learned story in that little after school program, before they let us touch a video camera, they made us take a series, I think 5 photos, and tell a story with those 5 photos, like write a story with those 5 photos. And we had to do it over and over and over again. And it made us really sharp with just simple story structure, beginning, middle, end, and some connecting pieces in between each. And that really sort of is the same mantra I use now. And I would go read, if I was a kid right now, I had to go read, or high school or college, I would go read Story by Robert McKee. I'd read to learn some of the business. I would read So You Want to Be a Producer by Larry Terman. I would read, just like more books that are more about how to develop story, and then also learn the industry as a whole, so you have a sort of cursory understanding of it.
The book that Robert Rodriguez wrote about the making of El Mariachi, he talks about that. He said, I had a truck, I had a guitar, I had a guitar case, and I had a church, and I had a bar, and I was like, and I had a bunch of buddies, and I just sort of figured out what they could play and what they could double, and I wrote the movie based on what I had.
That's
and
it.
I went and got the film pieces, and I knew exactly how long I had to shoot, and I made this. Then that take would be that long. And now with iPhones, and look, I had 16 millimeter. I didn't even have I mean, I had video, but it was like 3/4 inch video. It was very cumbersome. But now with your iPhone, like you said, with the editing capability, that's all taken care of. The technology part is done.
Yep.
I agree with you 100%. Learn how to tell a good story. And the way to do that, learning by doing, besides reading those books, is again, watching the movies from the beginning of the business to now. Because now, I remember when visual effects really started to take off. And I remember thinking, well, you can do anything now. Mm-hmm. And they do. And movies do everything now. But if you think about the first Superman, it was very difficult to make him fly, very difficult to do stuff. So they had to be very smart about how they told that story. Jurassic Park blew the world up because now you could make dinosaurs. But before that, he made Jaws and Close Encounters, which is mostly practical. And he had to tell a story in a way that hid the fact that the shark didn't work, but also make you believe that aliens existed by not just sitting there on the ship for 45 minutes, just in small doses, in that music and the impact of when that alien ship first landed with that music. And so it all starts a story. So if you go back to the older movies, like It Happened One Night, or in any of the Capper stuff, or the early, like the stuff we talked about, Gone with the Wind earlier, Howard Hawks stuff, it's all storytelling because they didn't have visual effects. They had big, cumbersome cameras that they couldn't move very fast. They barely had dollies, if they had dollies at all, but if they were, they looked like trains. And so they had to be very economical with the tricks they could use. And so it just became about storytelling. And you talk about The Godfather. If you look at that movie, there's no special effects at all. It's all really mostly close-ups and big wide shots. And the big wide shots set up the atmosphere and the breadth of the scene, and also the distance between characters. And then he comes in really close and makes this intimate conversations between the other characters. And it kind of vacillates between those two visual storytelling aids. But he really focuses on telling a great story. And if you can master that, then all the technology will be used as a tool to make that story better, as opposed to trying to reverse engineer it and say, what tricks do I have? Let me try to jam those tricks into something that'll make people feel visually blown away. And I think that's what AI, with the current vision of AI right now that I see, especially on social media, it's like, sparkles and fireworks.
Let me show you what I can do.
Yeah, look at this. Look at that. It's Bigfoot telling a joke, which is cute. But I think that regardless, it starts a story. And there's been movies that, look at Raging Bull and Taxi Driver that Scorsese did early on in his career that are just intimate, intense, character-driven stories. And I had Billy Ray on a couple podcasts ago, and he had shown Butch Cassidy and his Sundance Kid to a 24-year-old associate, and he said his head came off his body because he's like, what the hell is this story? Is amazing. And that story is so simple. It's two guys running away from a team of other guys. And so I think that in terms of people that are really looking to get into this business, and we've sort of degraded, I think, our whole industry by calling it content, as opposed to what it really is stories worth telling and telling well.
Amen. It's really a lost art, and I know I'm a young guy, but like the way I was taught was really old school, right? With Larry, and just, he was just a stickler for that, right? Like the only class that he taught was a film history class, basically. And I saw movies in that class that I'd never even heard of, that were really simple stories that I now share with other filmmakers too. Like one of the movies that Larry made us watch in the only class that he taught at the START program was called Nothing But a Man. And it affected me deeply because it was such a simple story, to your point, about a man who was a blue collar worker in a time where, that was frowned upon by high society, and so this young woman he falls in love with her father had no interest in her being with this guy at all. He didn't feel like it was up to par of who he was and the spot they held in the community and all the things. And so you see him dealing with that while also reconciling his own journey or disconnection from his father, and now having a child and wanting to be there for his child as well with her. All of that was just a really simple story that we've heard in real life a million times. And what made it radical in 1964 is that was actually one of the first stories that had a real nuance of the Black plight, right? And, and what's interesting, even further interesting is that it was not made by Black people, actually. It was these guys from Harvard who just felt like the story needed to be told and made a decision to make the cast Black because they felt like there was nobody making movies about Black people and their journey at that time, right? But the story was universal, and it was just so well executed that it made me realize, even further affirm, like, you don't have to do a bunch of crazy tricks. It's really about just having a really simple, very well executed, character-driven story.
So when you graduated from the Peter Stark program, what was the first moves you made to fulfilling? Because you realized early on when you recorded with your dad, you want to make some money at this.
Yeah.
So you must have realized when you graduated from Peter Stark, you got to start making some money doing this. What were the first moves you made after Peter Stark to fulfill that mission?
Well, you would think that was my mission, and so when I got to LA, that was my mission. Like, I got 2 years to get hot, because if it don't work out here, I'm going back to the farm. That was my mindset, And so I interned everywhere in order to get a job when I graduated. I wanted to be a studio executive, because a lot of people I looked up to that were producing the kind of movies I wanted to produce had been executives first, climbed the ranks, and then transition into a producing deal, right? Sometime transition, sometime fired, whatever. They got a producing deal though. And so that was my mission. And I took a left turn, much to the chagrin of my parents. I think I had one semester left in school, and I called them and said, "Hey, I'm not going to take a job when I graduate, even though it's very likely that I could get a job here at this place I'm interning right now. I'm going to go straight into producing." And they're like, "Oh, okay, cool. How much does that pay?" And I said, "Nothing." That was an interesting conversation. So I dove straight into producing. I hustled / struggled for a year. After start, we graduated May of 2014, and by May of 2015, we were in Cleveland shooting in pre-production for our first feature film called The Land.
Did you meet the people that you ultimately did that movie with at the Peter Stark program, or did you meet maybe one or two people and then they knew people? How did that come together?
Everybody on that movie I brought from school. So my producing partner at the time, Blake, was my classmate. And then Stephen Capel Jr., the writer-director of that film, was in the production program. Our DP, our editor, our makeup person, our costume person, everybody, our composer, everybody worked with us on other small stuff for free while we were in school, including like a proof of concept for that feature. And we went out to financiers, and it was Macro's first film as well, as a financier. And Priority Pictures was the other financier, and we just made it on a bootstrap, and they thankfully gave us the grace to be able to keep our entire crew together. So we had a lot of first timers on that movie. It was a lot of mistakes made, I'm sure, but the movie came out great because we all trusted each other.
Amazing. And full circle, Stephen Capel Jr. goes to work for Michael Bay. And
that's right.
At some point, does Transformers. So
that's right.
You had a full circle moment there.
That's right. I got close. Proximity.
A lot of people, when they think about producers, they think about like financiers or cigar chomping characters or characters they've seen in movies that are producers. And you are a member of a group called Producers United, as am I. And it's just so diverse in every sense of the word. There's not one type of producer in any way with culturally, male, female, genre. It doesn't matter. Everybody is good. Everybody does different genres. It's so diverse and different. When someone says to you, "Oh, you're a producer," what does that mean? Then they had a preconception of it.
Yeah.
What did you think of the world of producing And then kind of how do you feel about it now that you've been exposed to all these different these different people that do your same job in sometimes completely different ways?
Yeah, no, it's interesting. People, when they come to you for producing, certainly have a preconceived notion of what that means. Some filmmakers thinks it means, okay, hey, I'm done with creative development, so here, producer, go get me the money, right? Some people think it means that you're just going to be on set every day and manage that, and you're not going to give me any notes on the edit or any of that, right? It's not creative at all. It's just make sure my stuff is set up. Like, no, that's a line producer. That's not my ministry at all. There are people who do it much better than I, even though I've had to do it before. Now, my understanding, at least of how I show up as a producer, is a little bit of everything, right? So it is finding ideas, or sometimes ideating myself, putting the people around it to write it, to direct it, to, the whole thing, or supporting a writer director with an existing idea, supporting them in a way of giving them real notes. Supporting does not mean yes all the time, right? Supporting sometimes means applying a bit of pressure on that to really make it a diamond, right? So to make it a better story, to choose the right actors, right? Actors, sorting out the investment, right? Like for example, there are some producers in our group who are crazy adept at not only securing financing, but structuring financing and managing all the nuances of that, in addition to anything else that they may do in the producing space. That is not my world, at least not right now, right? That's not where my relationships lie. My relationships lie with filmmakers, with actors, with studios, right? And then some financiers, but primarily with those other groups. And so that's where my strong suit is, and in development, right? And so, I'm really good at having straight conversations with filmmakers, primarily because I don't have a filter, and I try to create a safe space where they don't have to have a filter. We can just be honest with each other. And sometimes that's tough because production is always tough, but that's my understanding of producing, is just to be, you're the vision keeper, but that often just means filling the gaps, right? I jokingly say, / not jokingly, that a producer is a super PA because your job is to ultimately assist everybody.
And right now, there's a lot of discussion about rebates and above the line and below the line. And obviously there was a strike which talked about above the line and below the line. And a lot of people think that we as producers, why should we get a rebate? We're all multimillionaires. We, fat cats. We don't need the help. We're just all living in huge mansions, and why should we participate in the rebate? What's your experience about as a producer? And you would look at your IMDb and look at your biography and go, man, Stephen Lowe is a very successful producer, very talented at his job. How are you finding the current market conditions, and how are you adapting to those?
Wow, loaded question. I mean, the first part of that is this notion of like a fat cat producer that's got all the money in the world, and that was not my experience. Coming into the business, it's not my experience now either, frankly, right? Like, coming into the business, I made that first movie, went to Sundance, we sold it was in theaters that summer. We had a big soundtrack from Nas, and he's at the premiere and all the things. And I'm standing on the red carpet next to Nas in a suit that I had to get from Goodwill, from a thrift store, and $300 in my bank account in New York City, because that's all I could afford, right? And so it was sobering. It was not disheartening or discouraging. It was actually very encouraging, because I'm like, that's where I am, and look at what's happening around me. So I know there's only improvement from here, right? That's how I received that information. But at the same time, it was a reality check. It's like, I got it. When we leave this thing and people's careers hopefully all go forward, including mine, I know it's going to look a little different, because for producers, you don't just automatically get pulled to a big movie now, right? You now have to go figure out your next indie or your first, studio thing or whatever it is. And then, at that time, unfortunately, you didn't get paid development fees or commencement wages or any of those things. So I was driving Uber and Lyft, in between those movies. And then I would do commercials and music videos as a producer. And just how God works, like, that all ended up helping me, actually, because Not Uber and Lyft so much. I didn't become a better driver or anything, but I did end up, winning a bunch of awards in the music video space and the commercial space, et cetera, that allowed me to start an arm of my company that we co-founded with a couple people called the Invisible Collective, that is a full-on advertising company in that space to this day, right? Where we get to bring in directors to help them get work, et cetera. But then also we do agency work, so we develop campaigns from scratch. And that's been able to help me balance, financially balance when the film and TV industry is slow. But there's times when all of it's slow. All of entertainment is slow. Like during the strikes, for example, to your point. Yes, there were some people, thankfully, who were able to kind of maintain. But I was looking around during that time, like, what am I going to do? I don't want to leave the industry. I want to stay in the industry. I love what I do. But I got to diversify, in order to stay here. And what's very powerful about producing is that it's absolutely a transferable skill set. If you as a producer, you understand how to identify talent, nurture that talent, develop story in a real way, and then put pieces together to help things come into fruition, you can apply that to business. You can apply that to other areas. So that's what I found myself doing, and it's really helped me become a better producer in traditional ways too.
And it's very sobering. And it's a lot of people that we speak to are going through the same thing, man. They're struggling. And you said you don't want to quit the business and you love it. But you also said something that was really interesting, which is you called it your ministry. Mm-hmm. Can you dive into a little bit more of that, like how you look at producing and when you say it's your ministry, what do you mean by that?
The perspective that producing is my ministry comes from a very specific conversation I had with my father. So where I'm from, and again, like I said, he's a pastor, but where I'm from, jokingly, if you can halfway talk good, then you are either going to be a lawyer or a preacher, one of the two, right? And I had no interest in being a lawyer, although sometimes a producer, you end up, revising contracts or looking at contracts. And I didn't have any interest in being a preacher. But I said to him one day, and there was never any pressure for me to go into ministry or anything like that. But I said to him one day, on Sunday mornings, from the pulpit, you can reach a couple hundred people, depending on who's in the congregation. But on a Friday night in a movie theater across the nation, across the world, I can reach thousands. Mm-hmm. Now on streaming, millions on a Friday night, right? And so you preach from the pulpit, and I'll preach from the pictures. Amazing. And that was our deal. And so, and it still is, right? And so it also is a barometer for the kind of stories I'm willing to tell and not willing to tell, right? I have yet to do like a faith-based movie or any of that. Like They Clone Tyrone certainly is not a movie I would show at church. But at the same time, there is a mission in every movie, right? And it's heavily draped in entertainment. I call it sugar with the medicine. That's really what it is. But that's how I look at it. And then from a creative standpoint, it's ministry in that way. But then also from a process standpoint, it becomes ministry because, like I know, sometimes when you're working with filmmakers or actors or even other producers or even studio execs, it almost becomes a therapy session, right? Where like you're having to be the guiding voice in a way, personally or professionally sometimes. And so I take those moments seriously and try to impart when I can. You have that same sort of process moment when you're dealing with, writers and trying to make sure that the story you're telling is not only cohesive, but it's also meaningful, right? Like that's also a part of it, like making sure that we're not depicting anything, for me at least, like depicting anything that's harmful is always my intent.
And it's funny because there is this phrase that's come up recently. I hadn't heard it before, probably 5 or 6 years ago, this faith-based phrase that didn't really exist before. Because like I said, I work at Disney for 10 years and pretty much everything we made was faith. I mean, you had faith, you brought faith to people. It was an uplifting story. I can remember 2 specific instances. One was Remember the Titans, and the other was Radio, where at the previews, people came to us in the lobby and thanked us for making the movie because they had something to say. and they were teachable. And what's incredible about both Titans and radio is teachers bought them and showed them in their classes as the way to teach people, the way to be a brother to somebody, in the case of Titans, and also just seeing someone who is mentally impaired and how to treat that person. And I it's so funny because I never thought of those movies as quote unquote faith based, because I think that there's this misnomer that if it's faith based, it's got this religious underpinning to it, and I don't find that at all. I talk a lot about the movie Sullivan's Travels, when he's in that jail chain gang and they play that comedy and he looks around and sees all those inmates laughing and forgetting about their trouble for an hour. That's what I consider faith-based. It's bizarre. Like we're making movies that are inspiring people to feel something, scared, happy, in love, emotional, whatever. So I really love that word ministry, because I don't think it has necessary implications of, well, it's got to have this like really, chaste view of the world, because there's a lot of ways to tell stories that can be inspiring of faith that don't have necessarily a particular religious bent to it.
Man, it's so important, and specifically, something that my dad also said was, it does me no good to preach a sermon if nobody's in the pew. And what he meant by that was, if everything else about this experience is not inviting, nobody's going to be there to hear what I got to say anyway, to hear the word anyway, right? So everything about the story needs to be inviting. It can't be, I try to your point, it's not about religion, right? Because at the same time, preaching to the choir is another colloquialism, right? It's like the people that I actually hope feel this and get to experience this and get to learn something from it, et cetera, are not the people who already know it. You can't learn it and know it already, right? So the people that you want to learn it are people that would be repelled by anything that is like overly religious, et cetera, right? So to your point, the term I've been using is faith adjacent, because it doesn't have the stink on it of like movies that are super saccharine and steeped in culture that may have caused hurt for some people, to be honest about it, right? It's more about being morally centered in a real way. So that's the lens, man. That's the lens, my barometer when I'm looking at projects.
So now that you've been through a strike, a pandemic, the explosion of AI, economic downturn, walk me through like where you're at right now, and like what is your process right now? What does your day-to-day look like as a producer, hustling the same way you were when you made your way from South Carolina to Los Angeles to be in the START program?
Yeah. I'm back in that mode, honestly. I'm back in that mode of like, okay, well, like frankly, sometimes I just sit and and think and meditate about how I got here, right? Like even this conversation is helpful in that way, because I have to remind myself the zone that I was in to make each one of those leaps, right? And certainly there was favor in those situations as well, and belief, but I had to work. And so what was the zone I was in to make those jumps, make those moves over the time? And that's empowering. There's no more power. I don't think there's any more powerful story than your own to inspire yourself, because the good news is you got 100% survival rate because you're still here, right? So that piece is something that drives me every day. And so, in real life, what it looks like now after the pandemic and after the strike and now that, AI being the topic of conversation always, I am acutely aware, but also intentionally ignoring is sort of how I move. So, I'm aware of where we are as a business, and it is tough. It is really, really tough right now. And so I know that you can't try to keep going through the front door when the front door is now getting painted with cement. You have to find new doors. And so for me, that's meant, my days now look like Still, sessions with writers and development, right? It's still sessions with studio or with financiers to go through cuts and things of that nature, things we expect a producer to do. But it also looks like having a conversation with international companies about doing co-production, but not for a movie. I got one situation right now where this guy came to me with a TV show that is animated, and I haven't done much animation, but we have a really good creative relationship. And because I've had to learn other aspects of business outside of Hollywood in order to maintain, i.e. marketing and even manufacturing with somebody I work with, Tabitha Brown, where we were working on a fragrance for her. She launched a fragrance business in April of this year, 2025, and hit $1 million in sales in July of 2025. And so, I've had to learn more tangentially about manufacturing. And so all that's coming to, and I was like, why am I in this space? I was just asking myself, like, why am I here doing this? Fast forward, this guy comes to me with a TV show. It's an animated show. I take it to my buddy who has an animation studio. I'm like, hey, I think this will be good for you. So I put the piece together there, right? And then I look at it, I'm like, oh, this is actually this is a show, but the way you're going to get this made and the way you want it made is to actually go make a toy first. Let's go manufacture a toy, make the toy blow up and sell it. You have a really decent following where you can make that happen. Let's sell the toy. Toy becomes popular. People get excited about it. Oh, all of a sudden, here's a show based on the toy, and you already have a built-in audience because you got all the customer data of all the kids and their parents who like the toy, et cetera, right? So that thinking is just producing, but it just happens to manufacture itself as a toy or as an animated show or what have you. And so my days now look varied, right? Because I'm also it does me no good to learn all this stuff and not pass it on, which is why I love the opportunity to do this podcast. And thank you again for the invite. But also, I'm teaching a class right now. I'm teaching media entrepreneurship and management. And it's, that's just a fancy word for producing, right? Media entrepreneurship and management is what we do every day, really. But it's creative still. So I'm just right now, man, just saying yes to things that feel right, at a really gut level, and being really curated about the movies and television shows that I produce. Instead of trying to have a crazy big slate, I'm really focused in that way.
Well, if this was inspiring to you to hear your own story, you're so inspiring to me, man. You really are, and I'm so glad that I've gotten to know you through Producers United and through this process. I've learned a lot from you, man. I appreciate you.
Oh man, likewise, humbling.
The thing I always like to do at the end is ask this question: best day on set.
Ooh, the first day. The first day is the best day on set.
In every movie.
The first day is the best day on set. I'm usually kind of sad on the last day, honestly. You go through quite a lot, and no matter how smooth or not smooth the production was, the last day is still sad because you built relationships with the whole crew and worked so hard to get to that point. And you hustle for years, sometimes, a decade in some cases, to try to get a movie made, and you finally get there, and that first day is just bliss because you're like, man, when that camera turns on, like, we're here, we're actually going. I've had movies where there was no question that we were going to get the money and get it made and all the things, and I've had movies where it was so hard, and I've had movies where it seemed like it was all perfect and then it fell apart literally at the last second before we started shooting.
Man.
And so getting to that first day, it's like, man, we did it. We're here, And so that's the best day always for me on set.
As a producer, you got to get there. You got to produce it. And if nothing gets made, then you can produce eventually. But everything's leading up to that first day, man.
That's right.
Well, thank you. I really, really appreciate this. You've been amazing and so inspirational. Thank you, brother.
Oh, thank you, Todd. I appreciate it, man. Good to see you.
Thanks for tuning in for this episode of The Producer's Guide. If you're a fan of this podcast, make sure to rate, review, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. And if you got any questions about producing, send me a DM on X at Todd_Garner. I want to thank my producer, Steve Delamater. And until next week, I'm Todd Garner. See you then.